At the Julian Way, we empower individuals with disabilities to thrive in faith communities by breaking barriers and fostering belonging. Your support helps us create accessible spaces where everyone feels valued and seen. Join us in making a difference today at www.thejulianway.org. Together, we can build communities of belonging.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Palsies with Palsies. I am your palsy, Bekah Martin Anderson.
And I'm your palsy, Justin Hancock. Hello, Bekah.
Hey, Justin, how's it going?
It is going well. I'm excited for this conversation because usually when we have guests, we get to have fun with strangers, and today we have fun with friends.
Yes, I'm excited for this conversation because I believe that the person that we have here is someone who will help me make fun of you, and that's always enjoyable. So, I'm looking forward to this. Are you frightened yet?
Well, this podcast is nothing. It's not about level setting right off the bat. So I appreciate your honesty, and I would ask our guest to come on and help me, but I'm afraid that he's only going to make the situation worse. So why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest?
Yeah, so joining us today, we have Reverend Ken Crawford. Ken is has been a pastor for many years and is now the head of Synchronous Life Systems, a coaching and consulting business. He is also on the Julian Way board and a dear friend of Justin's, and so we want to talk to him today a bit about his work and some of the beliefs and understandings of that undergird the work that he does, and just all sorts of fascinating things. Ken, hello.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, good to have you.
We're super excited, and the synchronous life concept and our work has dovetailed for many years, which we'll get into shortly. I did want to mention and not overlook what is the my favorite moniker for Ken. Ken is also a found family uncle to my 6-year-old Angus, and also known as the man I like better than Dad. So, if I gotta give that moniker to anybody, I would rather it be you, kid. So well done.
Your child also joining me and Ken to make fun of you.
Yeah. Always.
That may be because when I show up with toys and books and snacks, and because I'm typically not there when the disciplining happens. So
This is another similarity between Justin's child and my cat. Is my cat's favorite person is definitely one of my partners who plays with her for a solid 30 minutes upon arriving at my house. That's just incredible.
This will
that's
be
what love is, clearly.
This will be my final word before we get into the meat of the episode. Ken, you were absolutely under no circumstances ever to show up to my house with a puppy of any kind.
Fair enough. I promise not to bring a puppy.
Fair enough. I think we can move on now.
All other pets are open, but no puppies.
I vote for kitten.
I'll let Lisa handle the lizards and snakes and the like. So,
well, I'm way more interested in her response to pets. I think it's more likely to have significant consequences on my life. So
at least you know the range we're dealing with, my friend.
yeah.
But you and I have been, as Rebecca said, friends for, I really think, since what, about 2011 or so?
We met in the spring of 2013 at TCU at a conference.
2013, yes.
Yep.
At the Transform conference at TCU. Yep. And have, like, Ken is one of those rare folks that, like, it took us about 20 minutes to really know, hey, I could hang out with this person for a long time and not get bored. And I think for me, Ken, one of the reasons why is you were doing synchronous life and life coaching work when we met. And we've always been spiritual directors at the same time and talked about human flourishing in very similar ways. So I think to open the conversation, why don't you share with our audience what framework you bring into the work you do, particularly around human flourishing?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, happy to. So as Bekah mentioned, I spent 35 years as a local pastor in a variety of contexts, and within that, and within my own Christian faith prior to that, which leans towards the progressive end of that spectrum, the commitment to justice, commitment to wholeness and flourishing, the commitment to social care and concern for our neighbor, loving our neighbor as ourselves, has always been primary. And in my local congregational work, I was always leaning in that direction and trying to bring the church folks with me was one of the ways I thought of my work. And often I would be out doing that work, just interacting with people. One of the passages that inspires a lot of folks within that conversation is Matthew 25, where Jesus talks about the sheep and the goats. And the sheep are the people that he says, I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and in prison and you visited me. And the goats are the people that didn't. And both groups respond, Lord, when did this happen? And Jesus says, when you did or didn't do this for me. For others, you did it for me. And the question, and I think people of all faiths, most people of no faith, no religion, acknowledge, if people around us are suffering, we ought to do something about that. We'll disagree wildly about what we ought to do and who has responsibilities for which parts, but most of us say, yes, we should care for folks in need. In some way. One of the questions that I started asking, and some of the folks around me started asking, is what if we could work with people earlier in the process, so we didn't have to wait, like, lots of places have a food pantry. What if we could start earlier in people's life process and life cycles to say, what if we as a community function so that people never had to get in line at a food pantry? And that people's needs for growth and development, for wholeness and flourishing, to circle back to those words, were addressed in a communal kind of way, so that everybody had what they needed and more than enough to meet their own needs and have some to share. And so that led me into these coaching and consulting conversations. So the synchronous life framework that I developed comes out of, for me, the two creation stories in Genesis and the third creation story in the book of Revelation, where, as the stories describe it, God makes a garden and God makes human beings, and God puts human beings in the garden, and God hangs out with the human beings and the rest of creation in the garden. And there's abundance, and there's wholeness, and there's flourishing, and there's peace, and there's joy, and there's love, and there's harmony, and all the good things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are in the garden with creation, human beings, and God all together. And so that, it seems to me, is the divine theological aspiration that Scripture is constantly calling us to within the Judeo-Christian tradition. And I then, from that, say, okay, I see what I call the 6 domains of human flourishing, which are in pairs, and each pair has an internal and an external component. So there are 3 pairs, which is tied in part to the creation story that suggests that when God decided to make human beings, God said, let us make them in our image. So even though there wasn't a notion of a plurality of God, the Hebrew still uses a plural for God and God's own self-speech and self-description. And the Christian traditions, most Christian traditions, then later came to develop and understand God through one of the lenses was a Trinitarian lens for understanding God as Father, Son, and Spirit, or Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer, or whatever those. So these 3 pairs, internal and external, we're spiritual and physical beings that have an emotional and relational experience of life, and then we engage and interact on the world through our intellect and our occupations. And those 6 domains form the synchronous life system. And what I see is that we have the capacity for well-being in each of those domains and as a collective, as a whole. And so the work that I do, that my team and I do, is about helping people understand and articulate their own sense of well-being in the present through those 6 lenses, and then create plans and strategies and help them move towards their own greater sense of what well-being looks like for them. So it's not externally defined by any institution or agency or body or culture or society that says this is what you need to do to have well-being and to have wholeness, but for the individual to come to be able to articulate that, define that for themselves, and then understand what it means for them to move towards it.
Yeah, I love, Ken, that balance of kind of individual, individualized sense of what well-being looks and feels like for each different person, but also within that sense of community. That's
Yes.
it's there. I'm seeing there a real sense of like each person has their own unique path towards what well-being is for them, but also we're trying to get to a place where we all have achieved well-being, and we do that in part by working together. That there's the all of us together in the garden is a part of the point and part of the strategy, it sounds like.
Absolutely. And I'm of the group that says I take the Bible seriously, but not literally. So I don't take the creation stories as science or history, but as theological articulation for helping us understand who and what God is and who and what we are in relationship to God. And so given that, those creation stories put, within the story, God puts human beings in the garden to tend the garden. The second creation story says nothing was growing yet because there was no one to take care of the garden. Well, there's no further division of labor in the garden. Right? People in lots of different religions, including Judaism and Christianity, have sought to say this is men's work and this is women's work, for instance.
Yeah.
And that's not found in the creation stories. And so it is, nor is like taking care of the household and those things. Those are later adaptations and sometimes those are what people gravitate towards. Oftentimes those are things that are imposed by some sort of social norm. And so I think, this lets us step back from those things. It also lets us step back from and or maybe lean into the idea that we as human beings, this is my observation and experience anyway, is that we as human beings lean into or are drawn to a couple of, like, two or three of the six domains more than others. So some
Mm-hmm.
people are really drawn to spirituality. Some people are really drawn to physical challenge and exertion and exercise and things like that. Some people are really drawn to an emotionally expressive life. Some people are really drawn to just really impactful relationships. Some people are really drawn to the life of the mind and research and study and learning and coming up with ideas. And some people are really drawn to ways of acting on the world, whether that's through hobbies or their careers or building things or whatever it is. And we often default to some idea that some of that is normative for certain people.
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think that really limits us, or we as individuals see somebody that we respect and admire and think, oh, well, if I want to be like that person, that I should also want to engage the world the way they do, which may or may not fit, right? And so I think
Yeah.
we can find ourselves in a place where we're not experiencing well-being because we're trying to walk around in somebody else's clothes, if that makes sense, right? We're living out a life that's not genuine, that doesn't have integrity, in the truest early sense of the word integrity, which means like a fabric that has integrity means that it's strong and it holds together.
Yeah.
And so often, unfortunately, I think we miss those opportunities.
I think this is a particularly what's the word, fortuitous point in our cultural narrative to be having a conversation like this, because it wasn't immediate in my work that I discovered what I was really doing, but it was fairly quick that I discovered that my main job was going to be for the next decade plus to help decouple the concept of health and disability, and more broadly, to go on the parliament of this conversation, the concept of human flourishing from physical and mental health. I knew that was broadly the topic of our show, but I am curious, as a sort of on-ramp to that part of our conversation, how you see like humanity flourishing together or not together, and how this system could help us kind of reframe what we're doing as humans, and just how do you see, or do you not see, like, our general conversations, particularly around in the last few days, not really about human flourishing, but about something else? And I promised I would only ask you small questions, so there you go.
Yeah. So I think I want to start by saying I'm using these religious and biblical illustrations and references because that's where I come from.
Sure.
That's my origin story,
Mhm.
and it's the community that shaped me. And in my work, I don't impose or project that on other people. I believe that life is
Mm.
spiritual,
Mm-hmm.
that we are
Mm-hmm.
spiritual beings. I believe that non-human entities are spiritual beings also. That's another topic for another podcast. But
Mhm.
I believe that we are spiritual beings, and so we we draw closer to wellness and well-being and wholeness and flourishing when we pay attention to that and we allow ourselves to cultivate that. And while I believe that's true, I have no interest in imposing or projecting my religion or my spirituality onto other people. If they want
Mhm.
to ask about it and have a genuine, honest conversation, I'm happy to do that. Uh, but I'm not interested in turning other people into followers of Jesus, unless that's what they want, right? In which case, then it's not me. I'm not turning them into followers of Jesus. That's what they're doing, right? And
Mhm.
I'm just offering some observations. So I encourage people to find the spirituality or religion that works for them. And I think that, you know, having said that, as sort of an apologetic, I would say, you know, the miracle stories in the New Testament, the stories about Jesus performing miracles, are often used within faith community, within Christian community, to talk about health and wellness and disability and all these other kinds of things.
Mhm.
And when I when I think about those stories, one of the things that comes up is that uh, Jesus didn't heal people without their permission. And he
Mhm.
often said, "What is it you want?" Even when it sort of the observer of the story would be like, "Well, isn't it obvious?" And even if
Mhm.
it was, he's like, "What do you want? What does he want me to do for you?" So he left the agency with the other person. And in every single one of those stories, Jesus's concern seems to be not so much the physical illness or challenge or disability, but the way in which it separated them from community and from the fullness of what life had to offer them,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
which is important because there are lots of people that Jesus could have healed that he didn't.
Yeah.
Early in the Gospel of Mark, the disciples come and say, Jesus, there's another group of people that have come for you to heal them. And he's like, nope, it's time for me to go to another town, when the people had already lined up at the gate to to have Jesus fix whatever was broken, as it were, um, within that framework or mindset. And Jesus says no, because
Yeah.
it wasn't about the physical healing. It was something bigger than that. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind as we look at what is well-being, and how do we move towards it. I think in the kind of context of the current public conversation, which you didn't name, so I won't name, which helps the story. There's always something, right? There's always something. But in
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
context of the current thing, um, the thing that I see people, uh, I've got people in my life that live with chronic pain, for instance, and people in my life that have chronic heart conditions and diabetes and asthma and all these kinds of things, which their medical chart says, by virtue of those things, their medical chart says this person is not healthy.
Mhm.
Somebody without those things is healthy. This person is less healthy because they have these conditions. And we can treat those conditions, some of them with medications or therapies, so that the conditions do not further disrupt their life. But oftentimes those aren't cures. We're
Mhm.
keeping that thing from getting worse, and we're keeping the point really is to keep that whatever that situation is from disrupting the person's ability to fully engage life. And that's where well-being comes. And so somebody can have a significant lack of health, physical or otherwise, and still have a very high sense of well-being. People live with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and all kinds of anxiety and depression and all sorts of things. And as long as they know how to navigate that, they can have very significant well-being, including in that area. And so I think that's, for me, that's one of the primary reasons that it's important to separate health from well-being, which it really has more to do with how society tells us to think about health, perhaps. But
Yeah.
so much of our lived experience is framed by whoever decided how to tell the story in the generation before us. So.
Absolutely. No, it's, you know, these things are making me think so many different things, because, like, you know, there's a story about health that we could tell that, you know, that does say, like, I am healthy and I'm living with a mental illness, or, you know, I am healthy and I have asthma, but that doesn't, you know, in a, like, personal sense of health, you know, if that person understands themselves to be healthy, then that is, but like you're saying, like, you know, the way that our society frames this conversation about health, like, it's almost not a useful word when what we're aiming at is well-being, you know, and so, you know, I've been thinking about, you know, since physical is one of the domains of well-being, you know, I've been thinking about the sense of, like, you know, my physical well-being includes my blindness, you know, that's not something that detracts from my sense of physical well-being. And, you know, whereas on the other hand, like, I could imagine a totally non-disabled person who, like, you know, a doctor would write healthy all over their chart, and maybe they're a runner and they can't run a marathon right now because they're just not in the shape that they'd like to be to do that, and that person might not have a strong sense of physical well-being because of that. And, like, these things are so unique to each person, even if they're going to have some common features. That's less of a question and more just of a, like, digging deeper into this difference between health and well-being.
Yeah, I think that's a super important observation. I appreciate you connecting it to your own story, and I would, along with that, I would note that even without the, you know, marathon runner who's got a, you know, busted leg so they can't run, like, people who are what society would call, you know, physical specimens, like their picture of health and their doctor's chart, you know, either their physician or their psychiatrist would, you know, the chart is just like 100% healthy, can still have very low well-being scores.
Totally.
They can be miserable.
Yeah.
And so that's, and another reason why I think well-being is a more, at least within the synchronous life framework, why well-being is a more useful word, is it fits with all 6 of the domains. It doesn't make as much sense, I think, to talk about occupational health, right? When we do, we're talking about OSHA, we're talking about people not getting sick and hurt at work, which is not what I'm talking about, right? Occupational well-being means do the thing. In what way does what you do in the world, whether you get paid for it or not, because occupation is, again, this is the older meaning and definition of the word of occupation, which is anything you do outside of yourself that occupies your time in a significant way. So if someone's a poet or a gardener or does needlework, or, you know, those are all occupations. our primary relationships also take on an occupational component. So, as Justin mentioned, my relationship to the family, I also think of one of my occupations as Uncle Ken to Angus.
Mm,
Like that, I
Hmm.
prioritize that, and there are things that I do because of that, and things that I have to say no to because that's a priority, that commitment. So occupations are commitments, right? So if I
mm,
dabble in something, like I do not have an occupation as a gardener. I want to do yard work, but I don't actually want to do, and I, you know, I enjoy it once or twice a year, and the
mm,
rest of the time it's drudgery. So that's not
Yeah.
an occupation for me. It's a thing I have to do, but it's not an occupation. And so the occupations are the things that we do in the world that bring us some sense of peace and contentment and joy and meaning and purpose. And
mm,
hopefully we find those in our work. But there are a lot of people in the world who do a job to feed themselves and their community and have shelter that don't find meaning in their work and can still have a very high sense of well-being. Work doesn't
mm,
have to be meaningful in order for life to be meaningful.
mm,
Man, there's some wisdom all over the beginning, middle, and end of that thought. Um, I'm curious, and I doubt you would be able to quantify this. You may have numbers for this, I don't know. But do you find that there is um, one area that's more challenging for people to grasp as an avenue for human flourishing out of it? Is there a particular one of the 6 areas of a synchronous life that people frequently struggle with the most, or does that vary wildly depending on what group you're in front of?
I think it varies wildly depending on what person I'm in front of.
mm,
I think our capacity for emotional and relational well-being is so informed by our childhood. And
mm,
so, so many of us in as we move through adulthood start pulling back layers on things and make new choices about how to operate emotionally and relationally. And so that's can be really hard work, and that's true not just within our circles of care and you know family of origin and found family or chosen family, but in the workplace and out in the wider community, in the political sphere. Our the way I think it's particularly unfortunate the way we currently engage in non-conversation and discord,
Mm-hmm.
and the kind of emotion that we bring to that.
mm,
If somebody has a different opinion, we we start with emotion and we can't get to intellect. So I think socially, I think culturally, at least in the United States, what I see a lot of is we're so wrapped up in emotion and that we can't, and traumatized because of that we can't get to the intellect to ask,
mm,
well, why, what is it, like the question I want to ask across the political spectrum is, what kind of world do you want to live in? Let's have that conversation. What do you want for yourself and your loved ones and your neighbors? And if you want
Mm-hmm.
something different from yourself, for yourself and your loved ones than you do for your neighbors, or the people that you consider adversaries in life, why? Like why?
mm,
Like what's the intellectual reason behind that? And let's have some conversations there in a way that doesn't devolve into shouting matches and
Yeah.
insults. And how do we do that? So I think some people grow up and they're because of their environment, they're really drawn toward physical fitness, right? Some people grow up in families where it's all about sports and it's all about working out. And again, whatever that looks like for each individual in each family, that's a big commitment and big priority. Other people are super into their spirituality. And some people grow up committed to, like, their family was committed to one thing and they move in a completely different direction in adolescence or adulthood, and maybe make several shifts and turns, depending. Sometimes we end up in a relationship that we value, and because of the relationship we value, we find ourselves being drawn more and more into one of the other domains that previously wasn't important to us.
Mm-hmm.
But because we care about that relationship and we value that and we want a healthy emotional life with that person or that group, then we find ourselves really being engaged in those other domains as well. I'm not sure I answered your question, but
No, that was a superb answer. I do have a follow-up, but please go ahead, Bekah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was going to take us in a slightly different direction. So if you want to ask your follow-up, and then we can come back to me.
No, go right ahead. I trust us to find our way back around if it needs to happen. So continue.
Yeah, I mean, Ken, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about, how do we, if we haven't, thought about these conversations in terms of well-being before, or if someone's never heard of the of synchronous life, how do we go about starting? What does maybe a typical session meeting with someone looking to work on this look like if they're meeting with you, and if someone is trying to start working on this on their own, are there like some questions that they could ask themselves to figure out which domains of well-being do I need to do some work on?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for that. I mentioned the word integrity earlier. So for me, integrity, vitality, and harmony are outcomes, measurable outcomes of this process. Integrity, I mentioned fabric. If you think about the integrity of a ship or a building, right? The Titanic sank not because it wasn't a good boat. The metal was fine. It was constructed properly. So the boat had integrity, but the owners and operators of the boat lacked the mental framework to understand that it could still be, victim of an iceberg. So the ship was fine. Think about buildings that can hold up in certain circumstances, but not in others, right? So you build for earthquake in earthquake zones, you build for fire in fire zones, you build for tornadoes in tornado zones, et cetera, et cetera. You build for hurricanes and floods in hurricane and flood zones, so that the building has integrity. But a building on the Gulf Coast that's going to survive a hurricane might go up, in an inferno because it's made out of wood. Just so that kind of integrity, harmony is, which is where part of where the word synchronous comes from. So I'm a big Police fan. So the origin for me was really the Synchronicity album.
Nice.
Back in the day,
police the band rather than the concept overall.
and so the idea of music being synchronous, that the notes and the rhythms fit together, and there are limitless ways to do that, but not every way of fitting notes and rhythms together is synchronous. Right. And some composers intentionally create discord in their music. Classical composers love to do this, right? Some classical computers, which is intellectually interesting and maybe stimulating, but it's not pleasant to listen to for any length of time.
Yeah.
Some jazz musicians do it as a way to represent and capture a particular feeling, but then they're going to want to resolve that, right? And take you through that moment, that crisis, to some sort of resolution, in the same way that authors and poets do, right? So we want that kind of harmony, and then vitality, which again is different for every person. You can have vitality, integrity, and harmony in each of the 6 domains. And so the answer to one of the answers to your question is yes, there are. I've got assessments. There's a 6-point assessment, which is simply just pause, and that you can do this as an examen for people that are familiar with that term. You can do this as an examen a couple times a day. Just pause for 20 seconds and ask yourself, on a scale of 1 to 5, what's my sense of well-being, physically, spiritually, emotionally, relationally, intellectually, and occupationally? And it'll change repeatedly throughout a day. I had a coaching call 2 weeks ago with a guy, happened to be in Germany. It was our first meeting. It was our first call, and he was a couple minutes late. And I had to check in with him by text, say, hey, are we still on? And he got on the call, and he seemed kind of flustered. And turned out that his best friend's father had just passed away. And the best friend doesn't live in town, and so had reached out to him and said, hey, can you go over and check on my mom? I won't be there till tomorrow. And so, he did that, and he had just come from spending several hours with his best friend's mother and making the arrangements, and all that kind of stuff. And I made the observation, had he done, a quick synchronous life check-in first thing in the morning, he would have given himself 1 set of scores. Had he done it in the middle of that crisis, he would have given himself another set of scores. And at the end of our call, he would have given himself a 3rd set of scores, right? So the well-being is fluid throughout the day, and we can have an overall sense of, I've in whatever area of our life, like I'm, physically, I feel like I'm kind of a 3.5 or a 4 out of 10, not in terms of like how buff I am, but how good I feel about my physical well-being, and am I able to do the things I want to do? And am I taking care of myself in the way that I want to, that I value? So that's a big piece of it is, does that domain, and this is true for all 6, is it serving you and your life and the world in the way that you want it to? Is one of the ways of thinking about that, right? And so if not, what might you want to do about that? What would you like it to be, right? What's the gap? What's the now, and what's the future, and what's that gap? And then what I often tell people is, if you've got a really low score in one of those 6 domains, the most helpful thing is not going to be just immediately go after that, right? If somebody says I'm a 1 physically, well, the thing to do is not to go sign up for a gym membership tomorrow. Because if that were going to work, it would have worked yesterday, right? It's not going to suddenly start working. You didn't just discover that you didn't feel
yes.
physically. And so what I typically tell folks is, figure out where you are a 4 or a 5, or you have a 3.5. Like, where are your highest scores? And let's lean into that, and let's make some progress. Let's find some momentum. Let's find some easy wins, right? In some settings, we talk about what's an easy win here for this organization. Often is how that phrase is used in organizational life. What's an easy win? Because easy wins get us momentum, they get us a little bit unstuck, they get us forward progress, and they get us the happy hormones, right? They get us the serotonin and the endorphins and the oxytocin. And so once we get those, our cortisol level lowers, and we feel better about life in general. And we do that a couple more times, that increases our overall sense of well-being, increases. And this is one of those situations, not always true, but this is one of those situations where a rising tide does lift all boats. So if we raise our overall well-being by focusing on a couple of places where we've got more capacity already, then then our overall well-being score would move from a 3 to a 3.5.
Yeah.
Which means that 1 is now a 1.5. The 1.5 is now a 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we've got momentum, we've got energy, we feel better about ourselves generally, so that now when I go to the gym, I'm not quite so much of a, in this downward spiral. I'm in an upward spiral, I'm in an upward trajectory, and I'm going to bring the gym with me, or whatever it is, whatever that physical well-being score, whatever it means to improve or increase that. And sometimes that's a mindset change. I can't think of his name, but there's a fitness coach who in his training, when people start working with him, for the first week, he tells them, I don't want you to go to the gym. I just want you to visualize being at the gym for a week. And the second week, I still don't want you to go to the gym. I want you to visualize being at the gym, and I want you to move. I want you to get ready. So I want you to have your water bottle, and I want you to have your workout clothes, and everything is ready to go. But don't go to the gym. And so by day 15, you're chomping at the bit to go to the gym. And instead of 3 days at the gym and you're like, ugh, this is horrible, you've been building momentum and energy for 14 days. You shifted your mindset. You visualized what it is. Top athletes talk about visualizing, and there's fascinating research around this, that visualizing shooting free throws without actually shooting free throws improves one's ability to shoot free throws. So the visualizing ourselves being in a better headspace, being able to do something physically, visualizing, right? When people are in crummy relationships, what are they visualizing? Conflict, commitment, right? We run those pictures and those films over and over again in our heads, which just perpetuates that. So how to do something to disrupt that. And oftentimes improving our well-being in another part of life. So often, if people are having trouble with their relationship, let's not go 100% at that right now. Let's find some other place where you can make some improvement and feel better about yourself and the world. And then let's come back and try to work on that thing that's really troubling you.
There's lots of good stuff there, Ken. I love that.
Yeah,
so a coaching call, again, the assessments are on my website. There's a free 18-question assessment. There's a longer assessment that comes with an engagement. Coaching calls are one-off sorts of things, or a series of conversations, either with an individual or with a group. And so there's lots of different ways to connect and engage. And the book is hopefully, knock on wood, will be published. I'm going to publish a couple things on Amazon in October, but I think the Synchronous Life book will be out by the end of the year.
Fantastic.
We'll put all of your current links in our show notes. And when you get the book out, please let us know. As you're talking, and then I was gonna inquire about one thing, and then we'll land the plane and get us all back to our lovely lives. But as you're talking, I'm so struck by the other sort of emotional and personality assessment tools out there right now. Most people know some version of the Myers-Briggs. There's the Enneagram, and there's the 5 Strength Finders. And I think, with the exception of the Myers-Briggs, which seems to have baked in from way back a concept that your type never changes, and even they've lightened up on that a little bit. But I think most of those systems come with some inherent flexibility. But in my experience, the longer they get used, the more they tend to, and the more popular they tend to calcify in a way. And I love that this system doesn't really depend on you being one or another, either a personality type, or I'm a 6 or I'm a 3. It doesn't kind of try to set you into a mold, but more it lets your experience, the way you experience life, kind of shift and change. And I just love that human flourishing can look different day to day. And what was flourishing for me at 25 is gonna be like maybe even detrimental to me at 44. So I wonder how conscious you were of building in that sort of change dynamic into this system to let it kind of grow with the person and be very user friendly and very flexible.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I don't quite know how to answer it. I was telling somebody the other day, I have an interesting relationship with this system. That's similar to the way I've heard artists describe their work sometimes, that I don't feel like I own it. It's mine, it's my intellectual property, obviously, right? It feels as though it came from somewhere else. And I don't want to, again, I'm not trying to unpack that right now. But what I would say in terms of a couple of things I would say in response to what you just were describing. One is that it is very intentional that it is not a personality or style or functioning assessment. We've got plenty of those. Other people are always making, Patrick Lencioni's got the latest one for business leaders, and it's amazing. One of the things and I use those in my coaching, I use those in my consulting, I use them in my leadership, right? Whether it's DISC or Enneagram or Strength Finders or Myers-Briggs or the Big Five personality test or, whatever it is, those are great. So one of the things that I tell leaders, if they're looking at working with me and using this system in their organization, is, as you noted, this is different. This is about doing something else that's complementary. So whichever those assessments or tools or frameworks you're drawn to, those don't do what this does, and this doesn't do what those do. Right. So so let's go ahead and do that. Like if we're working with an organization or an individual who loves Myers-Briggs or Enneagram, yep, absolutely. Let's think about that. However you understand yourself through that tool, that's fine. At the end of the day, even the most powerful of those doesn't give you a way to check in on yourself. I think the Enneagram goes the deepest of all of those, and it still doesn't give you like a very simple set of tools to say, okay, how do I check in on myself today, in this moment? Where am I? Where do I want to be? What's the gap? What are some little things I can do to move forward? And so, that's, I would say, it's a complement to all of those tools. One of the, people like to talk about emotional intelligence. And you can take a class on emotional intelligence, you can read a book, you can watch a TED Talk or do webinars or whatever. At the end of the day, emotional intelligence is about knowledge and information. And this system is about wisdom. It's about knowing ourselves and having wisdom into ourselves and how we're experiencing and moving through the world. And so the without a system like this, without a set of reflections like this, we don't pause and get quiet enough to really notice, where am I and where do I want to be? What's the gap there? One of the things we say is we have to slow down and pay attention so that we can move forward with purpose. And in that slow down and pay attention, that's when we're doing this assessment. And then the moving forward with purpose is where we say, okay, well, what step can I take that will help me make some progress and increase my sense of well-being? And in the process, how can I help increase the well-being of the people around me? One of the things that's great about this for any group of people, any two people, their coworkers or friends or family, or a large group of people, is when everybody in an organization has access to this framework, it gives them a shared mental model. It increases compassion dramatically, because even though we're not all approaching life in the same way, and we're not all having the same struggles, and we don't all find joy in the same experiences or domains of life, we all have something. We all have places where we thrive, and we all have places where we struggle. And so reminding ourselves of that regularly means that when we're encountering people who are at a different place in their well-being on that day, we've got a gentler approach with them. And we can say, people may or may not want to tell us what's going on with them. And that's fine. That's their story to tell or not tell. And we can say, what can I do to support you today? And the more we grow in our capacity to do that, coming back to the earlier conversation, the more we cultivate a community where everybody has access to what they need in order to be able to thrive. And for me, that's the ultimate aspiration, the ultimate goal, is to give everybody the opportunity to thrive and to flourish and have a sense of well-being, and the world and culture is often not built to promote those things. And so we're often resisting very strong cultural forces and very strong forces even within our own heads and hearts. A lot of this is imprinted on us from such an early age, to be defensive rather than being gracious and generous, and to put up walls and to hide where we're struggling rather than being vulnerable. And being vulnerable starts with being vulnerable with ourselves. If we're not willing and able to be honest with ourselves, then we're not going to be able to make progress. We're not going to be able to increase our sense of well-being personally, nor are we going to be able to promote the well-being of the people around us. So whether we're doing it for ourselves out of a sense of self-interest and self-care, put your own oxygen mask on first, kind of a thing, or whether we're doing it, out of a sense of caring for others, it's either way, it's an important starting place.
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for all of this, Ken. This has been such an amazing conversation and such important work. And as we get ready to land the plane here, where can people find out more?
Yeah, so easiest thing is Ken G. Crawford. My full name is Kendrick Garrison Crawford, but online I'm Ken, Ken, the letter G, Crawford. And I'm that on all the social medias. My website is kengcrawford.com, and there are others, but you can link to all of them. There's a Substack you can link to there. There's an Eventbrite, but all that stuff is also found both on my social media, on LinkedIn, or on my website. So
awesome.
things to read, things to watch, conversations to join, both in person and virtually. I do most of my work virtually, so Zoom calls and phone calls is most of it. So accessible. We've worked with people in 11 time zones on 4 continents in the last couple of years. So
Very cool.
love to meet new people in new places that I'll never get to go probably, and hear their stories and support them in moving towards wholeness and flourishing for themselves and their community.
Awesome.
Well, it will be a while before this airs, so we'll get with you and put some of those resources that you mentioned as well on the show notes, as I said, as well as some of your contact info. And yes, as Rebecca stated, this was just fascinating, and I was sitting here going, wait a minute, we've been friends for a decade plus, and I didn't know you did that, and I didn't know you did that, and I didn't know you did that. So it was extremely enlightening, even as someone who knows you well, and hopefully in these times when things can seem confusion, we have served one of our purposes here at PWP of just giving people thought-provoking conversations and another thing to grab hold of and find some balance. So, friends, if you want to know more about our show, you can find us at all of the premium podcast places: Apple Music, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, etc. Basically, anywhere a fine podcast can be found, we'll be in the corner smiling at you, going, "Listen to our show." And as always, friends, we invite you during these times that are often so uncertain, as I said, to go out and put some good into the world. Thanks for being with us, friends.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye.